Órale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. I'm your host, Jorge Martin. And hey, Familia, we're on YouTube. Please give us a like and subscribe, por favor. We're getting close to that subscriber number of 100 subscribers. Please. And we are a proud member of the Fantasy Points Media Group. Familia, you go to fantasypoints.com. You get some of the great fantasy minds. I mean, I tell you, you've got they are in the middle of 32 days, 32 articles, 32 podcasts, everything. You got key off-season moves. You got just Scott Barrett's strength of schedule. You got Graham Barfield's pace and tendencies, data points from Chris Wecht and Brett Whitefield. You got Joe Dolan and Jake Tribby giving you projections for fantasy contributors. Joe Dolan is doing a beat writer series, so you'll be there's going to be some crossover there. And you got Dynasty Bylaws from Wes Huber, John Hansen, the fantasy guru himself. Final points. You also got betting previews from Tom Brawley. Everything is getting you ready for the start of training camp to get you ready for your draft. So make sure, go to fantasypoints.com, use the promo code Familia22. And if you want to do it in Spanish, put Familia22, get 10% off your subscription. Familia, I couldn't have anybody else but this guy on it. He's a return guest. And honestly, I was listening back to the interview that we did last year, and it was just the intellect that was coming through, the intel, everything was fantastic. He is el hombre when it comes to the Jaguars. I'm telling you, he's my go-to guy. He's the publisher of Jaguar Report, which is under Sports Illustrated, the umbrella, and they go to their NFL sites. It's right there. He's a great guy when it comes to fantastic analysis that we're going to be able to use for fantasy football. So bienvenido to mi amigo, John Shipley. John, welcome in. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing awesome, man. Thank you for your kind words. Like you said, remember doing the show last year. It was one of my favorite ones to do, and I was really excited to see your message because I remember we talked last year about, hey, let's do this again, a year from now. So I love coming on, and I'm happy to talk about what everybody is hoping to be a little more functional of a football team.
Please.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into that. I mean, because there's so much hope tied around this organization, and Doug Peterson comes in. Can you give me some early impressions of how the changeover has gone? He's a former quarterback, which hopefully means good things for Trevor Lawrence, the Golden Boy. He's a Super Bowl winning coach. Kind of his mantra is make Trevor Lawrence great. What is early thoughts, and is this organization kind of heading in the right direction?
Yeah, no, I think when you look at the Jaguars, their search for a head coach this offseason, I think it was clear that they were looking for a guy to develop Lawrence. I mean, three of the final four guys were quarterback guys between Peterson, Byron Leftwich, Nathaniel Hackett. Matt Eberflus was really the only guy that they were seriously interested in who wasn't, a known quarterback developer. So I think the development of Lawrence was one of the key things they wanted to hone in on with that hire. And I think, when you just look at in terms of pure pedigree, I'm not sure there are many coaches who got hired this offseason who have done more with quarterbacks in the past. I look back to Carson Wentz, his development from year one to year two. Before he got hurt, he was a legitimate MVP candidate. Nick Foles, that stretch of games that he had, it wasn't just a Super Bowl. It was, an impressive stretch of games, and then he had an impressive stretch the next year. And one point I made on Jacksonville radio often after Peterson got hired was, he's such a good coach that he made Nick Foles look good enough for the Jaguars to want to pay. And obviously it didn't work out for the Jaguars, but Peterson was able to make it work with Foles. So I think he's proven that he can, work with less talented quarterbacks than Lawrence is in the past. And I think as a former quarterback, he's a great source of knowledge. Lawrence had a former quarterback on staff last year in Darrell Bevel, but Peterson's different completely. He played, at every role for a quarterback in the NFL. He was a journeyman. He was a backup fringe roster guy. He was a starter for a little bit. And I really think just, his knowledge of the position, the way he sees it, and how he tries to make things easier on the quarterback, I think is a great fit with Lawrence. I think personality-wise, I think they're a really good fit with each other. Meyer, Meyer and Lawrence, just personality wise, in my opinion, never really seemed, like a fit. Lawrence is more of a laid back guy who, he wants to take coaching and hard coaching, but I never got the sense that a guy like Meyer, who, not saying he did this, but, he did this to other players, a guy like Meyer who will, absolutely rip you if you make a mistake. I don't think that was, the kind of coach that Lawrence really benefits from. So I think that change is a positive. I think when you talk to people inside the building, and I'm not just talking players, obviously the players' opinions of Peterson compared to Meyer are, a complete 180. Peterson has said before that he had to do a lot of healing inside the building. There are a lot of trust issues from players, toward coaches after the Meyer debacle, especially young players, which I think anybody can, really empathize with. And I think the one area that, has really stood out is it's not just players who are, seeing the difference in Peterson and Meyer and the kind of leadership Peterson's bringing. It's other people who work in the building who I know when it comes to Sundays, this might not matter as much, but, people who work, whether it's for the PR department, the security team, the people who, work inside the stadium in the offices every day. Those are people who I think, from conversations I've had and seen that, I've had really positive, interactions and communications with Peterson. So I think he's overall bringing the franchise more credibility. And, the one example I point to so far is it was on, I believe, their first day of OTAs. It was either their first or second OTA practice that was available to the media this year. It started raining like hard and lightning about, 15, 20 minutes into the practice. And right now, they were doing their OTA practice on the actual field that they play on Sundays because of construction going on. But they do have a small indoor practice facility. And, they quickly, once lightning hit, they said, we're going to the practice facility. Media can follow us. By the time media got in there and we were right behind them, they were already separated back into the position groups, running drills, looking organized and efficient. And I thought to myself, if this was last year, I think you would have seen guys still, kind of walking around, not really knowing where to go. So I just think more organizational, really competency. But it's funny to really applaud a team for being able to get back to practice the right way. But this is something I don't think they would have been able to do last year.
Oh man. Well, the big question surrounding is, and I kind of teased it a little bit, is Trevor Lawrence. It was a rough season last year.
Yeah, it was.
12 touchdowns, 17 interceptions, tied for the league lead. And then he had a stretch where he had 8 games where he had only 1 touchdown. Wasn't always pretty. Number one, did you see anything that could give fantasy football players some hope for this season? And kind of like what have you seen, or heard that's coming out that could be positive for this season?
I will say I do think the Jaguars, even in spring practices like mini camp and OTAs, I think you can see that their skill group has taken, a step forward. I think one example I'd point to is, last year Laviska Shenault was one of the stars of OTAs, and I really went into training camp last year thinking Shenault might be their best, skill player that wasn't named James Robinson. This year, Shenault is, the cleared number 4 receiver, in spring practice, having to get reps at returner to really, justify a spot. To me, that shows, improvement of the overall depth and the overall roster. You have guys who were getting first team reps at tight end last year who are now getting second and third team reps because, Evan Ingram and Dan Arnold are in front of them. So I do think that you can see the weapons around Lawrence have improved. Have they improved enough, or can they even be more than average? I'm not sure, but I think they went from one of the worst skill rooms to at least one that can be, right there firmly in the middle, average with the rest of the league, and I think that shows. And I thought Lawrence looked more impressive this spring than he did last spring. I think when he first got to Jacksonville last year, you could tell that, he had all the physical tools, but, the reality was the Clemson offense and, really everything he did under Dabo Swinney, it didn't do much to prepare him for the NFL. So I think he was perhaps more raw of a prospect entering the NFL than a lot of people, potentially thought, and that he had to kind of get by a little bit on his physical tools as a rookie while everything else kind of caught up. this spring, I saw those things catching up. I saw him with a more cerebral, commanding presence, of the offense, instead of, panicking if the first read wasn't there or trying to fit throws in, and trying to be a superhero. I saw him take a more conservative approach at times. And I also saw him still have, kind of that, aggressive style of play that made him so successful at Clemson and at times as a rookie. And I would also say I saw his overall, really the speed at which he processes, gets the ball out of his hand. I thought that increased. I thought, overall everything was just crisper, another second faster. And I think his overall accuracy looked better as well. So obviously we won't know until week 1 at Washington and beyond that. But I think, comparing what I saw from Lawrence last spring to this spring, I do think it is night and day. And I know, for a fact there are those inside TIA Bank Field who were with Lawrence last year who think, he's made tremendous strides so far.
Where do you think could be the greatest area for improvement with him?
I think that the biggest thing is probably overall consistency in terms of finding the explosive plays. I think just, being able to really not have it be where you're looking to 1 or 2 or 3 throws a game as, really the throws that you want to hang your hat on as, okay, those impress. Whereas he can be, more impressive throughout the entire course of the game, be more consistent. And I think just taking out that one boneheaded throw a game, that 1 or 2 boneheaded decision a game that, a lot of times it can make a 10-7 game go to 17-7 or, 20-7. So I think just taking those out is something that can really benefit him.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think I feel like that's where the greatest growth happens with year 2 players, especially on the quarterback side. If the guy is going to make that leap,
yeah,
those things seem to
absolutely. And I think it's important to not want to neuter his playmaking instinct or ability and tell him you have to be more careful. But I think just overall, kind of having him reel it back in and knowing, okay, there are a couple plays a game that can decide, really the outcome. These are the plays we have to be more consistent at because, I think a lot of his rookie year you can put on leadership and poor personnel around him. But I mean, there are other times and other throws, a 4 interception game against Tennessee where you can tell it's, it's a gunslinger trying to make things happen. I know a lot of people don't look at Lawrence, they see the long hair, the laid back personality. I know a lot of people don't look at him and see like a gunslinger with a Brett Favre like aggressiveness, but he really is, that type of quarterback. So I think just reining that in a little bit is the important thing, but still encouraging him to, hey, go out there and make plays.
So I got one last question on him. He ran the ball 73 times, which actually kind of surprised me when I saw that stat. Could he be a running threat again this year that many times, or does it look like they could rein him back in a little bit?
There were times in camp where he was able to do some damage with his legs. I thought watching last year that he wasn't as, I guess you could say, maybe explosive as, a runner as maybe he looked like at Clemson. I thought the NFL, I thought he was very efficient moving in and out of the pocket and buying himself time. But when it came time to, crossing the line of scrimmage and actually getting yards and, chunk plays and even touchdowns like that, I thought he was better as a guy moving behind the line of scrimmage than past it. I just thought that's where his athleticism stood out more. So I do wonder just how much rushing value he actually has. Like I could see, there in the goal line, I could, see him being a, real frequent option in that regards because he's good at, fighting to get those couple of short yards. He's not going to give up on a play. But if you're, asking him to drop back and then pick up a first down with his legs, I'm not sure that's going to happen very often.
So let's move over to the running backs. Travis Etienne coming back from the foot injury and with serious foot injury. You got James Robinson. I mean, suffered I say tragic because of the timing of it, because it happened so late in the season with the Achilles injury. And then there's Snoop Connor, got drafted in the 5th round this year. I've talked to a medical expert who does not expect James Robinson to be on the field for, at the beginning of at least at the beginning of the season. I don't think we're expecting like Cam Akers type of thing, because that may have been outlier. Can you break down, because I know you've talked about the fact that you feel like the running backs are a little thin.
Yeah, no, I think that an expectation that Robinson himself has had. Whenever Robinson talks about his recovery, he always talks about coming back during training camp. I'm not sure if that is when he'll actually be back at any point. I know he's expected to miss the start of training camp. I'm not sure if the Jaguars have a firm timetable on when he's expected to be back, but he himself has said, training camp is his goal. He's looked good when, he's ran, on the sidelines, he's doing sprints and all that. I think that the important thing with him and his injury is I think, you see a lot of running backs have this kind of injury, and where it hurts them is it makes them, less explosive, less really dynamic. The big thing for him is his game was already, vision, breaking tackles, getting to that second level. He wasn't, really blowing by a ton of guys as a dynamic runner. He is naturally an explosive guy with his, first 2 or 3 steps. And I think he still can be, but his game is about vision. His game's about instincts, and his game's about 3-down ability, which I really believe, once he's back on the field, I don't personally believe this injury is going to impact where he brings the most value. And that is, in my opinion, on 3rd down, because he is the only running back on the Jaguars roster. I think that, you could line up in week 1 on 3rd down against Washington's defense and, really have faith in to, pass block and protect the quarterback.
And what about Travis Etienne? How's his? There's been some a little bit of weather balloons that are kind of going up. People are getting excited about him possibly.
Yeah, no, I think Etienne has, it's hard to judge running backs in the spring because, so many times teams are, really pass happy just because, you're in shorts and helmets. It's more like glorified 7-on-7. But just in his actual movements, the big thing they did with him was let him do a lot of routes and a lot of receiver type thing this offseason. Not like last offseason when Urban Meyer said he was going to play both receiver and running back, but because they said, hey, we're not in pads anyways. You're not going to get a ton of useful reps running in between the tackles right now. Why don't we get you reps, really running routes and do stuff you can potentially do on Sundays in the fall. And I thought he looked explosive. I thought he was able to cut on, where the foot and the direction where he really had the injury, which I was really curious about. How did he look, cutting on that foot after having surgery? I thought he looked natural. I didn't really think he looked hesitant. I thought there were a couple different plays where, there was one play where he ran a drag across the middle of the field, and once he got the ball, was instantly able to turn it up north into the end zone. And I just thought to myself, I don't know any player on the roster who looks as dynamic as he does right now, and that's after the injury. So I thought that he looked a lot like he looked last spring, in minicamp, really explosive. If anything, I thought he looked more confident in a lot of the stuff he was doing. So I think he's a guy who, you obviously want to wait and see because, he's never played an official NFL snap. We don't know how he's going to look when, if he's asked to carry, a large load on the ground. There are questions about his, 3rd down value because of pass protection issues in college. But just in terms of how he looks, I think he looks like their most dynamic player on offense.
Fantastic. Snoop Connor is I'm kind of looking at him as possibly a sleeper. I mean, some draft nicks have said that he's a good guy to have grabbed late in the draft at where the Jaguars did. He's available toward the end. If assuming Robinson starts the season on the PUP list, or that he's still rehabbing, could Connor be kind of like a change up back that could be
I think that it's important, when talking about the Jaguars backfield, to look at what Doug Peterson's done in the past. And I think you can see with the Eagles, they kind of always have felt like had 3 running backs who, obviously they would have different roles and different volume in terms of touches, but they had 3 running backs who it felt like on any given Sunday could get the ball and could be the guy. I think he wants to do that with the Jaguars. I think he wants 3 running backs he can feel comfortable with each Sunday, being on the field. And right now, if everybody's healthy, including Robinson, Etienne, I think Connor is, that 3rd guy. If Robinson's slow to start the season, I think Connor's that 2nd guy, and he could see a bigger role than, people might think, because I'm not sure they want to put too much on Etienne's plate right away, with him coming off that injury. I wouldn't imagine him to make Etienne like a 25 carry type of guy, week 1 of the season. So I do think Connor could have some fantasy value, because I do think, especially until Robinson returns, he could play in, a relevant amount of snaps just because of how Peterson likes to use the position as, kind of a platoon.
Awesome. Well, please help me make some sense of the receivers. People have talked all they want about Christian Kirk. You know what? The money doesn't follow him on the field. So you got Christian Kirk, you got Zay Jones coming in, you still got Marvin Jones, and you mentioned Chenault as kind of like the number 4 guy right now. Can you kind of help me and our listeners just kind of figure out how the targets are going to get broken up?
I think that Christian Kirk is, not by virtue of how much he got paid, but by virtue of his skill set and his fit in the offense. I think he's going to see, the most targets, on the offense this year. I think he's going to primarily be in the slot. I think, there'll be times you see him outside and it'll be matchup dependent. But I do think his primary role will be in the slot. And, when you look at their roster today, they don't have many guys who can, be a vertical threat downfield. Well, Kirk is one of the better vertical slots, in the game today. So he can be that kind of chunk play guy. That's who he was for Arizona last year. After Kirk, I really think the guy who's going to see the second most targets in the offense is Marvin Jones, because when you look at the Jaguars lineup today, their top 4 pass catchers on the field would be Marvin Jones, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram. Trevor Lawrence has only thrown with one of those guys before, in a real game. He's still developing his chemistry with guys like Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram. So I think just having that second year with Marvin Jones himself having that experience, he's been referred to as basically the assistant wide receivers coach because of just, how useful he is, in terms of experience and teaching the younger guys. So I think Jones, he's clearly seen as a starter right now. Their top 3 receivers are set. It's Kirk and the 2 Jones. And right now, Marvin, I think, is going to see the second most targets just because he has that relationship with Lawrence, that chemistry, and, his skill set kind of will demand, him to still see the ball at times. And then I think Evan Ingram, I think you could see him potentially have, more targets than a guy like Zay Jones. Zay Jones, I'm interested to see how the Jaguars publicly say they saw him is how they really utilize him. When they signed him in March, Peterson talked about him being a big body downfield threat. But, Zay Jones, his entire NFL career, he's been an intermediate, type of guy. He's been a route running technician, but he's not going to be a guy that wins downfield. So I think if you have anybody who's going to win downfield, I think it'd be either Kirk or Evan Ingram, who's really good at stretching the middle of the field. Ingram, I think, is going to be, not only I think he's going to see a lot of targets because it's Peterson's offense, which, obviously emphasizes tight end, but there are 2 things that I think are really working in his favor. One, from conversations I've had with people inside the building and just from what I think Ingram has shown, I'm not sure there's a player on the roster right now with a bigger chip on his shoulder than Evan Ingram, which, when you consider how bad last year went, for the Jaguars, you'd maybe think of some other players. But Ingram, he's the only Jaguars free agent who signed a 1-year deal this offseason. He's somebody who I think wants to put his Giants tenure behind him. And, I have a story up on the site where the tight ends coach said, he's determined to have the best year of his career this year. So I think Ingram is going to be somebody whose self-motivation is going to be really high. And then I think, his skill set really meshes with Lawrence. Lawrence, both at Clemson and last year at the Jaguars, was at his best throwing to big body, targets with length, guys who can kind of win up the seam. And that's exactly what Ingram is. And when you compare Ingram to those other 3 targets, Ingram's the only guy who is really, kind of like that. So I think that's how it's going to shake out. I think Kirk, Marvin Jones, and Evan Ingram are all going to see, a healthy dosage of, really targets. I think Zay Jones will obviously have his role and he'll have some weeks, but I do think if there's one guy who will probably fall behind the others in targets, it'd be him.
Any hope for Laviska Shenault? There's a lot of truthers out there for him.
I think there's hope in the sense of wide receiver. To me, wide receiver and cornerback are the 2 positions that I think it is so important to have depth at, just because of how many injuries, teams are using three people at those positions every week. You're bound to have one of those 3 guys get injured, at some point. So, the Jaguars ever have an injury to, Kirk, Marvin Jones, Zay Jones, Laviska Shenault, he's a starter again. And I think you look at a lot of rosters throughout the NFL. I'm not sure there are many number 4 receivers, quote unquote, who are more talented right now than, Laviska Shenault. So I do think there's hope for him. I think that the Jaguars have hope for him. I think they still see the potential there. They just know that, they have to find a way to get it out. And because, I mean, you look back, Chanel, he's entering his third different offense in 3 NFL years, even dating back to college. I think he's on his fourth or fifth different coordinator in a row. He's a guy who he's never been allowed to really develop in one spot and shine. And I think being that fourth guy this year, he could have a chance to do that instead of kind of being fed to the wolves.
Awesome. And you already covered the tight end, so we can just jump straight to the offensive line. Early on, there were a lot of people talking about the possibility of taking a left tackle, kind of like a franchise left tackle. There were a couple of guys that were potential candidates there, but it seemed like they were down to Trayvon Walker, Aiden Hutchinson. The defensive side of the ball definitely needed some help. What is kind of like the outlook? I want to kind of talk about like versus the run, how they're going to look. Let's start there, because they definitely needed help on both sides, both against the run and the pass.
Yeah, I think right now, if you had to, think about a week one starting lineup, obviously Cam Robinson's at left tackle. I think Ben Bartch is the favorite, at left guard. He was everybody's favorite sleeper offensive lineman a couple years ago. It's funny. Everybody talks about how, it takes offensive linemen several years to develop. And then a guy's doing that developing and people, kind of, put him aside. He's a guy who's entering year 3. The Jaguars think he's entering kind of his breakout stage to where he could, kind of prove to be a really solid starter. They lost Brandon Linder at center, which is a loss, but they, the longest tenure player on the roster was Brandon Linder's backup, Tyler Shatley. He's entering his first season as starter, but he's basically been a co-starter at center for 3 of the last 4 years. Over 30 starts there. Right guard, they have Brandon Sheriff, and then right tackle, it's either going to be Jawan Taylor or Walker Little. And if there's any plus side to Jawan Taylor after 3 so years, it's that he gets an A+ in durability. You never have to wonder if you're going to have him on the field. He's never missed a snap in his career. He's made 49 out of 49 starts at right tackle since being drafted. And then Walker Little is somebody who really impressed in 3 games of relief for Cam Robinson last year. That is, I think, the most important battle on the roster entering camp, Taylor versus Little. So I think right now they project as a solid run blocking offensive line. I think that they're going to use the scheme to their advantage a lot. A lot of wide zone, doing a lot of stuff that Doug Peterson did in Philadelphia, stuff to kind of put the offensive line in good situations. I would say I think they probably project better in the running game than in the passing game right now, just because you have a young guy in Bartch who has to prove himself as a pass blocker, and then you have to see how right tackle sorts out. But I think they project as a solid running game when you mix in their scheme, the pieces they have on the offensive line. And I think the most underrated hire that they made this offseason was offensive line coach Phil Rauscher. He's a Bill Callahan disciple, former assistant offensive line coach of Callahan. I think, bringing him in, he's a big reason Brandon Sheriff is in Jacksonville right now because of their time together in Washington. I think bringing them in together is, a really big deal.
So last one on the defensive side of the ball, where they definitely drafted a lot. Talked about Trayvon Walker, added a couple of linebackers, and definitely drafted some cornerbacks later in the draft. This was still a team that could be attacked at both ways. This team has to improve just to get to kind of the middle. How do you see the defense shaping up this year?
Yeah, I think the defense has a lot more depth across it. I think it has a young secondary with, some unproven pieces and some guys they need to see take a step forward. Guys like Andre Sisco, guys like Tyson Campbell, who are really young, really talented, but you have to actually see that development take place. But I mean, I think they have the pieces up front to actually bring pass rushers in waves this year, which I haven't been able to say about them, in my years covering them. I think between Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, Arden Key, DeJuan Smoot, Ward Robertson Harris. You have a couple guys who can get after the quarterback from different positions, and then they still have Caleb Von Chase on who, only 2 sacks in his first 2 years, but he's a former first rounder who, the spotlight is on entering this season. So I think that, they have the pieces to kind of make it happen as a defense and improve. It just, it'll take time because they're adapting to a brand new scheme.
Yeah, I know. I know one of the highlights was Josh Allen sacking Josh Allen.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the fun.
Exactly.
Last one, a fun one. We talked Mexican food last time. I mean, is there a city that you've enjoyed or are looking forward to enjoy some good Mexican food on a road trip?
I'm making it to Canton for the Hall of Fame game, and I know Canton, Ohio might not be the place to go, but I'm really excited to learn more about Canton, everything up there. So I'm definitely going to hit something up there.
Oh, awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I'm actually going to be there. There's a fantasy football expo the following weekend, so I'll just
Perfect.
miss you. But yeah, I'll be hitting you up for places to eat on there.
Yes, sir.
So, oh man, mi amigo, I'm gonna give you a plug right there. Please point everybody to where they can get your great work.
Yeah, you can find me at _John_Shipley, at Jaguar Report on Twitter, or si.com/NFL/Jaguars. We publish content daily, analysis, news reports. We do everything.
Outstanding, outstanding. I'm telling you, everybody, he's a great follow. He's going to give you what you need from the Jaguars. As you guys keep following Fabio Football, aka Trevor Lawrence, he's going to give you the news. So, familia, eso es todo for our show. Again, please make sure to go to fantasypoints.com, put in the promo code Familia22, Familia22. Get 10% off your subscription. Get yourself ready for the season, and make sure you're following me at Jorge Martin 17 on Twitter. I push out all our content that way, articles that are at familiaffb.com. We also have our archived interviews on there, but also go to Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You get the audio, you get the video at YouTube, see our faces again, and also Familia FFB, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Otra vez, to our invitado de lujo, John Shipley, Juan, as they called you a couple times last year. Muchas gracias. And everybody, remember, todos somos familia. Salud.